With grunge music on its way out by the mid-90s, a new subgenre of rock called post-grunge sprouted up in its ashes, and one of those early bands was British group Bush. Lambasted by critics as being derivative of bands from Seattle, their home country of England never really embraced the band early on, but those circumstances did little to hurt record sales, as by the end of the 90s, Bush sold over 14 million albums worldwide and headlined arenas and became one of the most successful groups of that decade. Today, let's talk about the history of Bush. Compared to grunge bands before them, Bush leader Gavin Rossdale had a pretty posh life. Growing up in northwestern London, he had a middle-class upbringing, being the son of a doctor who had politically connected patients, some of which were part of the African National Congress. His mother, meanwhile, was a model. Rossdale would attend the prestigious prep school Westminster and attempt a career at soccer that would be cut short due to an injury. His parents would divorce when he was just 11, and he would be raised mostly by his father and aunt. By the age of 17, he left school and started his first band called Midnight. All the members of Bush had older siblings who were teenagers in the late 70s when the punk explosion was at its peak. They would be exposed to groups like The Clash and the Sex Pistols, and Rossdale would tell the LA Times, "Growing up in England, we were all punks in our own way. When I was 12, I had this spiky bleached blonde hair. I was really into it." Rossdale would be a late arrival to pick up a guitar, not playing the instrument until he turned 19, and he would tell the Chicago Tribune, "I left home at 17 and was this wandering soul at 19, and decided to become a singer, a very purposeful decision to be the singer because I wanted to be rich and famous. It was then I decided I wanted to be on stage, craving the attention of thousands of people." Rossdale would support himself with odd jobs while playing in a variety of bands, including a mid-80s pop act named Midnight. Much to their surprise, the band got signed and even put out a few singles and opened for the likes of Big Country and Cyndi Lauper, but that's about as far as they got. Rossdale would tell Rolling Stone, "We got signed way too young in the mid-80s when everyone was throwing all this money around. We weren't developed and we didn't deliver. So as far as the A&R community in London was concerned, I was soiled." And Rossdale would soon leave Midnight and play in several other bands, but he ultimately decided to change up his life, telling the magazine, "My life was too safe in London, so I thought going to America would help my career. When I got there, I came to the conclusion that there was nothing to my life. An irrelevant band, no one I was with personally, no family ties." By 1991, Rossdale would move to California for about half a year. Friends back home helped him set up accommodations, and he made money working on music videos as a production assistant. He would recall to Rolling Stone the highs and lows of his new home in America, saying that the high would be seeing Nirvana perform at the Roxy in LA, while the low point would be crashing at the place of an ex-girlfriend of 5 years. The same ex-girlfriend whose boyfriend Jake Scott would go on to direct Bush's video for Comedown. The early days of Bush would date back to November of 1991 when Bryan Adams played Wembley Stadium. At that show, Rossdale would meet a fellow musician, a guitarist named Nigel Pulsford, and they soon bonded over their musical taste, with Rossdale telling Rolling Stone, "When he mentioned the Pixies, I knew that was it." Pulsford, for his part, had played in a band named King Blank, who would sign to British indie label Beggars Banquet. Pulsford and Rossdale's first project together was named Future Primitive, which was a little different than the type of music Bush would play. An English record executive would tell Rolling Stone, "They weren't what they are today. They were a little like the more commercial side of NXS. But I'll say this for Gavin, he wasn't going to be held back by people in London who resented his looks or his money or his history." Bush's success wouldn't really have happened without a man named David Dorrell. He was a British man whose career began in the 70s. He'd established a fanzine which saw him befriend the members of the Sex Pistols. In the following decade, he became a writer for New Musical Express magazine, or NME, and he would follow his writing gig for NME by becoming a DJ, and at one point was hired by MTV Europe to work on sound collages, one of which he would turn into the hit single Pump Up the Volume for Mars in 1987. The track marked a significant milestone in the development of music sampling and British acid house music. Dorrell and Rossdale knew each other from the London club scene in the mid-80s. While they were friends, the idea of collaborating wouldn't happen until they crossed paths in California. Dorrell was in LA to remix the Tina Turner 70s era song Nutbush City Limits, a song that Rossdale was working as a video assistant on. Dorrell would tell Rolling Stone, "We seemed destined to work together. When I next saw Gavin, he had the basis of Comedown. It seemed to fuse elements that excited me because of my musical history." And Dorrell would soon become Bush's manager. Rossdale and Pulsford would soon add bassist Dave Parsons and drummer Robin Goodrich. and Goodrich would cut his teeth playing in punk bands as a teenager and soon became an electronics engineer. He would become familiar with Bush through Doral, who he worked with, according to Rolling Stone, saying, "I did one of those classic Keith Moon things at one of their gigs in London. I got drunk and went backstage to tell them what I thought of their drummer. I think I scared Nigel." The quartet would call themselves Bush, a name which was inspired by Shepherd's Bush, a district of West London. Bush would record a demo and shop it around England, but they didn't have many takers. Their fortunes would change when a British radio producer would tip off an American record executive named Rob Kahan. The Bush track Honky Manchild was getting some airplay on a BBC Radio 1 program that featured unsigned acts. Kahan up until this point had managed British star George Michael, and Kahan would see Bush perform on the British TV show The Word and heard 5 of their songs, all of which would end up being huge singles from the group's debut record. Kahan would sign the band to his label Trauma Records in 1993, who had a distribution deal with Disney-owned Hollywood Records. As the band's debut album 16 Stone was finished in early 1994, life threw a curveball at the group. Disney executive Frank G. Wells, who was a big backer of Kahan, would tragically die in a helicopter crash. Following his death, the executives at Hollywood had no interest in releasing Bush's debut record, and the band soon lost their distribution deal with Hollywood Records, with Rossdale recalling to Kerrang what happened next, saying, "Someone there famously said, not only are there no singles on 16 Stone, there are no album tracks either. Went back to my day job as a painter and just thought, oh, okay, well, I enjoyed making the record at least, that was fun." Interscope would come to the rescue and agree to distribute the album. By the fall of 1994, Kahan would send an advance copy of Bush's debut record to LA radio station KROQ or K-Rock, who immediately took a liking to the song Everything Zen. The song would premiere on Jed the Fish's afternoon drive show as the catch of the day in November of 94. Due to the success of the single, the label moved up the release of 16 Stone from January of 95 to just before Christmas. Rossdale would reveal to Kerrang how much of a life-changing moment writing Everything Zen was, saying, "Writing Everything Zen felt like a seismic moment for me. I guess I had written enough shitty songs by that point, I was inevitably going to start writing some better ones. As with all the earliest Bush songs, it started with me and my drum machine. I'd record the riff on a cassette tape and then walk around Hyde Park playing it in one ear and trying to sing melodies and lyrics to go along with me. Writing the lyrics, "Should I fly to Los Angeles, find my a-hole brother," felt like a change in my approach. That incendiary lyric immediately felt like it had more impact than anything else I'd previously written," he'd say. Of course, MTV only helped bolster album sales. The network soon started playing the video for Everything Zen in December of 94 on their program Alternative Nation, and the video soon found itself on the network's so-called Buzzbin, which was a group of music videos by up-and-coming artists that the network deemed buzzworthy or cutting edge or the next big thing. But it wasn't just MTV and rock radio that helped push the album sales of 16 Stone. Some retail music stores, including Camelot and Musicland, would have music video kiosks called New Music Review. These kiosks near the front of the store would allow customers to cycle through 20 videos from the hottest artists at the time. Billboard magazine would interview the marketing director for Cellophane Square, a now defunct record store in Seattle, who told the magazine that once Machinehead was added to the video kiosk, their stores saw sales spikes in 16 Stone. When it was all said and done, their debut album would sell over 6 million copies in America and produce several massive singles, including Machinehead, Everything Zen, Comedown, Glycerine, and Little Things. Perhaps Bush's success wasn't just tied to their musical talent, but their lack of competition. 1995 also proved to be a light year for alternative rock bands, with the group's drummer telling Rolling Stone, "Kids split their dollars up between whatever's available, and we weren't competing with many of the major bands," pointing to Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Nirvana. The band's success followed a similar formula to other European acts at the time, but with one fundamental difference, with Rossdale revealing, bands like the Cranberries and Radiohead put records out in England first, but they weren't successful, so they had to come to America to find success. In contrast, our record deal was based in the San Fernando Valley. Rob Kahan offered us a situation with full creative control, and so we went with it. Side note, guys, I've done a full video on the history of the Cranberries, the link is down below. 16 Stone wouldn't come out in Britain until February of 1995, 3 months after they debuted in America. The band seemed to struggle in their home country, with the Independent writing in 1995 that, and I quote, "Bush played to a crowd of 60,000 in Washington, D.C. A month later, they were in front of 150 people in a Birmingham, England pub." Not only did the band struggle to gain a foothold in their home country, but they were lambasted in the press. Following the success of 16 Stone, the band received a lot of backlash and comparisons to bands from Seattle. Rolling Stone even did a whole piece on the band in 1995 titled Nirvana Wannabes. These criticisms the band brushed aside, but there were a lot of similarities between the bands from Seattle and Bush. Rossdale dated, or at least was friends with Courtney Love. He dealt with chronic stomach pain like Kurt Cobain, and Bush would even work with producer Steve Albini, who worked on Nirvana's In Utero album. Even Nirvana drummer Dave Grohl saw the similarities, and it would escalate with a short-lived feud between the pair. Rossdale would answer these comparisons telling Spin magazine, "I didn't teach myself to sing in a certain way. You can't manufacture that, you know. The Seattle comparison is really such a lazy one. If you've got loud guitars and the singing isn't screechy high, it's almost inevitable that you'll be connected with bands like Nirvana, who have done so much for music after all." Even radio station program directors pointed out the similarities between the Seattle bands and Bush, with Billboard interviewing the assistant program director for New York's Q104.3 station saying, "Everyone thinks they're a Seattle band, but they're from England, which makes it even cooler." The press also focused on Rossdale's good looks, something which only further hurt the band's credibility. Rolling Stone would famously write a profile of Bush in the mid-90s with a beefcake photo of Gavin on the front cover, shirtless with a question asking, "Why won't anyone take Gavin Rossdale seriously?" Bush's camp was pretty upset with the front cover. The band's manager would tell the LA Times that the group had no say in which photo was used on the cover of Rolling Stone, hoping that they would instead use a shot of all four band members. Rolling Stone, meanwhile, would respond to the controversy, telling the LA Times that no one forced the Bush frontman to pose that way. Rossdale would tell the Chicago Tribune about his weird relationship with the press, saying, "I'm seen by the press as this dilute little wanker. I should just send a cardboard cutout to sit through interviews, preferably shot in good light to accent the cheekbones that everybody likes to write about so much. No one in 3 years has said to my face, 'You effing suck,' but every time I turn around there's a carving knife stuck in my back," he'd say. So who was your typical Bush fan in the mid-90s? Well, the LA Times would publish a profile in 1995 that read, "While their appeal to teenage girls would go without question to anyone who isn't blind, the musicians proudly insist that the audiences they draw are about half male," with Rossdale saying, "We get an interesting spread of all ages. We got flowers from a couple in their 50s the other day with a note saying, 'Hi kids, we thought Everything Zen was a bit vulgar when we first heard it, but then we bought the album and read your lyrics and they were very interesting.'" In just 1 year since their debut album came out, Bush would go from being an opening act to actually headlining arenas. And a lot of the media pieces covering the band's second album, Razorblade Suitcase, of course focused once again on the comparisons to the music out of Seattle. One of the editors from Enemy magazine from the UK would tell the Chicago Tribune, "Over here the big question is, what is America thinking? We've all heard it done better by other bands, and the irony is all those bands are from your country." With Bush's second album, the group hoped to stray further from those comparisons to Seattle, with Rossdale telling the LA Times, "You know, after the Smashing Pumpkins put out their first album, Gish, everyone said, that's interesting. Isn't that Jane's Addiction?" Then their breakthrough album, Siamese Dream, came out, and suddenly they had their own musical island, and they became the purveyors of good taste in music, the authority in how it should be. Maybe that will happen to us with our second album. There will be no more comparisons to other bands. Of course, hiring Nirvana producer Steve Albini only brought back more Nirvana comparisons. Rossdale would answer this claim, revealing, "Steve Albini has been more important to me in terms of records I've listened to than any other person. In Utero is included in that, but it came after. I'm talking about before." The band loved Albini's work with the Pixies, but Gavin was also happy to hire the same artist, Vaughn Oliver, who did the artwork for Surfer Rosa. Albini himself had a reputation for being snobbish and working with underground bands, and was well known for not taking a percentage of album sales, something producers typically do. Instead, he would just take a flat fee for his work. Some thought hiring Albini would only hurt the producer's credibility, but he gave his reason for working with the group, telling the Chicago Tribune, "When Bush was in Chicago, Gavin called me. I hadn't actually paid any attention to them other than hearing them in the ether. I went and met him at a Thai restaurant for lunch. My girlfriend Heather came along. She is a remarkably astute judge of character. She can spot a sucker from a mile off. She and I could both tell Gavin was a genuine guy, remarkably untouched by his success, and you couldn't meet a more down-to-earth, hardworking bunch of guys than Bush," he'd say. The band took no time in between the promotion cycle for 16 Stone and Razorblade Suitcase, with Rossdale focused on keeping the group's live energy going, telling Billboard, "What I didn't want to do is have all that work we put into those 2 years on the road disintegrate." The band had already written a few songs on the road in 1995 that would make their way onto their follow-up album, and Rossdale would head back to London and set up shop in his basement for about a month, telling the magazine, "I literally had 4 to 5 weeks to write music in total. I had a few songs I'd written through the year, but generally most of them were written during that period." The reason Rossdale only had a month to write the music for their next album was because Albini had given the band a scheduled date of when he wanted them to enter the studio. Bush's second album would be written against a backdrop of turmoil in Rossdale's personal life, as he'd recalled to the Chicago Tribune in 1996, saying, "I didn't want to make a moaning record about how awful my life is, but I'm naturally drawn to sad songs because I like drama presented musically." Rossdale would split from his girlfriend of 5 years during the making of the record, recalling, "Being in this band has destroyed my personal life. I haven't had one for 2 years. I'm no longer with the woman I told last fall that I would be with for the rest of my life. I came home after our last tour and watched my home dismantle before my eyes. She's packing to leave in one room, and I'm trying to create songs in the other," he'd say. The band's label threw a lot of money at promoting Razorblade Suitcase, landing the band on SNL, The Howard Stern Show, and they even partnered up with Best Buy to give fans a CD-ROM that featured 4 live performances, interviews with the band, and a bonus track that was cut from the record, and studio footage. Part of the label's strategy for their second album was to establish the band in other territories like Asia and Europe, where they hadn't made inroads yet. Razorblade Suitcase's first single, Swallowed, took only 3 weeks to top the rock charts in America, and it would go on to sell over 3 million copies. The song almost never made the record, as producer Steve Albini thought it should be left off, not being a fan of the loud, quiet dynamic, according to Rossdale. But the band's label felt strongly that it be included because it could be a single, and they were right. Swallowed would also prove to be Bush's only big hit single in England. Despite the death of grunge by 1996, radio programmers would laugh off any question about whether the public in America was tiring of Bush, with the program director for Dallas station KDGE telling Billboard, "They're smoking right now. They're one of the hottest acts. I'd like to be their manager." These kinds of projects don't come along very often. While a music director for the Boston radio station WBCN would tell the same publication, "We've seen no burnout on this band. There's been some burnout factors on some of their songs, but not on this band." And by the time of their second record, the band had already scored 3 number-1 hits, including Comedown, Glycerine, and Swallowed, a number-2 hit with Everything Zen, and 2 number-4 hits with Little Things and Machinehead. By the time Bush was working on their third album, they ran into trouble with their label, Trauma Records. Bush wanted to renegotiate their deal. It was something the label balked at, and so Bush refused to hand in their third album, and a lawsuit ensued. The band would be sued for $40 million by their label for breach of contract, and Rossdale would tell Spin Magazine, the larger principal, that the band was defending, saying, "When you sign, you get a certain kind of deal. When you sell 14 million albums, you think the deal should change." A deal would eventually be worked out between both parties, but it resulted in the group's third album, 1999's The Science of Things, being delayed. It was the same year that the band would headline one of the nights at Woodstock 99, but much to the chagrin of their label, the album wouldn't come out until after that performance. To make matters worse, an early mixed version of the single The Chemicals Between Us leaked and was picked up by K-Rock. The station would be sent a cease and desist letter, and eventually the final mix would make its way to rock radio. The album would see more electronic sounds, and it would end up going platinum in America. Following the release of their third record, Bush would sign to Atlantic Records, and in late 2001 they would release their fourth record, Golden State. While a lot of the album was written before 9/11, the album's theme seemed fitting for the times, with lyrics dealing with doubt, fear, and understanding the world. Due to the album's lyrical themes, some of the songs and artwork had to be modified. The original album cover had a plane on it, which was eventually changed, and the lead single, originally titled Speed Kills, was renamed to The People That We Love. The album was a commercial disappointment, only moving about 380,000 copies in the States. The band was unhappy with the lack of label support, and shortly after the release of Golden State, Nigel Pulsford would leave the group to work on his second solo record and witness the birth of his son. The band opted to tour without him, and by 2002, Bush finally called it quits. In the years that followed Bush disbanding, the members, including Rossdale, pursued solo music ventures, and Rossdale even started a band named Institute, who got open for U2 but didn't find much success. By 2010, Bush would reform, with Rossdale telling Face Culture why he returned to the band, saying, "I miss playing shows with Bush. I miss being in the power of a band. I felt like a boxer with one arm tied behind my back." The reunion would only see original members Gavin Rossdale and drummer Robin Goodrich return, with Nigel Pulsford and Dave Parsons opting not to take part in the reunion, with Rossdale claiming to MTV that the pair gave their blessing, saying, "I really thought Dave Parsons would do it, so I was a little surprised by that. And I knew that Nigel will play on the records but not go on the road. We're all on perfectly good terms, it's just not where they're at," he'd say. The band would release their first album in 10 years with 2011's The Sea of Memories, an album that would be produced by Bob Rock, who famously worked with Metallica during the 90s. The group's album debuted in the top 20, but sales quickly sputtered, and it remained on the charts for only a few weeks. 3 years later, the band put out Man on the Run, and most recently put out their latest two records, 2017's Black and White Rainbows and 2020's The Kingdom, both of which would not chart. Goodrich would end up leaving the band in 2019, leaving Rossdale as the only original member of the group. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.